Now that it is converted for a smart filter, I can say filter, noise, dust and scratches, and decide at what level of radius or what threshold of fuzziness I want to repair. And actually, I want a fairly high, well, moderately high level of threshold, because what I want to do is retain the texture of the original photo. If I change the texture of the original photo, it's going to look like the background was painted in. And the key here is to make it look like it was not retouched. So I think a compromise is approximately 35 pixels per inch. Excuse me. I think a compromise is approximately 35 levels of gray that I will allow to be the tolerance for what is considered dust or a scratch. And that gets rid of most of them. Yeah, I could do larger and still not lose that texture. Go 40. No, 35. I'll do 35 and a radius of 5, and I think that will be okay. I'll say okay. Now you see a new mask has popped up down below here for a smart filter, and here's the dust and scratches. It has no effect on the actual pixels, but I can turn this on and off here. Turn it off here, and I still have my preserved original layer. I can regain the selection by command or control clicking on the thumbnail for the mask. So if I wanted to use that as a limit, as a mask for additional retouching, such as using the spot healing brush, I can't actually do that on there. What I have to do is add a new layer. And on this layer, I have to make sure that in the control panel at the top, it says sample all layers. If I don't sample all layers and I use the spot healing brush, it doesn't do anything. I have to say sample all layers. And then, for instance, this scratch here, or this little one here, that one there, these little marks here, this big spot here, and I could just very quickly remove those. Command D, deselect. I can always regain my selection as long as I have this mask here. At the edge of the image, sometimes it's hard to get the spot healing brush to work the way you want it to. But you can use the clone tool. And the clone tool will sample an area of the image and duplicate it. The Smart Healing Brush is actually also doing that. It is sampling the surrounding texture, and it will attempt to match that. So for example, I've got a spot right here. Now let's take these little black spots here, and if I click on that, it samples what's around here and uses that to make a repair. Command C undo, and maybe I should harden up the edge a little bit and try that again. So click right here, and that's a little better because it hasn't bled out into the existing area as much by using a harder edge. All of my retouching will be on this layer, so I'll call this the retouch layer. And you can see that I can always turn this off and compare it to the original to see if I have altered the appearance of the photo. I can do all of my retouching on that layer using either the spot healing brush, and here I'll go very small because I don't want to radically alter anything in the appearance of his face. Or his hair. Now for the hair, when I see stuff that has a texture or parallel lines in any way, I usually will use the clone tool. Reduce the size of that. You'll notice that the clone tool gives you a preview of what you're cloning. So if I sample this area, you can see that it's going to show me what's going to happen if I click again. I'm going to reduce the size of it more and sample perhaps this area here so that I'm going in the same direction that his hair grows. Likewise, if I'm at a shadow, the edge of a shadow, I might want to clone that way to follow the shadow. It's kind of a hard edge, so I'm going to soften that edge and do that again. On his shoulder, there's a big flaw, and that's another area where I would use a clone tool and hold the Option or Alt key to sample and then see if you can match that piece up. And sometimes I'll do it from both sides just to make sure that it's properly blending. Same with, if this image is fairly low resolution still, so you can't really see the texture of his coat that well, but you sort of see it. So there's another case where I would probably try to follow the direction of the weave. Or for example, running along the lapel, the line of the lapel. So if I Option or Alt click here, and I can see I'm lined up with that, and that would be a good way to get that little spot out of there. This is okay for practice here, but this is more crucial when you actually have a sharp, detailed image where you want to match a fabric or a pattern. Then you would want to be able to line it up and match that pattern. And you don't have to go in really tight. This is a low resolution image. So if I go in really tight here and decide, whoa, there's a spot there, but if I look at it this size, I can't really see that. If you think you see it, a small spot healing brush and zoom it in a little bit, looking just a little bit closer, but not real close, I can see like a little hair or something was on the negative right there and left a little streak on his collar. And these ones that are big enough to see at this size, I would do those. But don't go in really tight and look for really small things, because at some point you may not know the difference between something is actually a dust speck and something is actually part of the image. Viewing at a medium size, I've got a better idea of whether or not I need to take that out, because really small things won't show when the image is actually reproduced. Remember that from here it would go to a halftone, so there'd be a loss of detail there. And I'm not really sure if this is like, again, because it's low resolution, this could be some sort of stick pin in there, or it might be that that's a flaw in the image. It's really hard for me to tell. In the folds, again, I want to kind of follow the shadows. So I think I'll clone that. And a little bit this way, a little bit that way. You're probably okay with that. Got one more in his hair. Okay, so that'll probably be good enough for Fred. So if this was the Adobe Classroom in a book, we'd be done now, but we're not. I'd like to see this tinted the way they used to hand tint black and white photographs before we could have color images. And then you'd have a nice vintage hand tinted looking photograph. But you can't add color to a black and white image. Any color I pick is going to come out gray. So we'll have to go back and look at image modes. This is grayscale. If I want to add color, it's got to be RGB or CMYK or lab color. You can ignore multi-channel. We're using 8-bit. There are 16-bit and 32-bit versions of all of these color modes, but they will produce a huge file that has such subtle variations in color that they're not perceptible to the human eye, especially after commercially printing. So everything we do can be 8 bits per channel. 8 bits per channel grayscale, that's an 8-bit color depth. RGB at 8 bits per channel, and I'm going to say don't merge because I don't want to merge any of my effects. I don't want to rasterize any of my effects. Image mode, this is now RGB at 8 bits per channel, so that's a 24-bit color depth. I have a channel palette, and you can see that I have 3 channels, red, blue, and green. I'll show you more about that on the next exercise. Now that I have a color, I could add another layer, and I'll do this above my retouching so it applies equally to the retouching and the background. And now I could paint on this layer in red, and you can see that. Of course, I also painted over Fred's face, so I need a mask for that background. I can command click on the thumbnail to gain that selection again, and then select this layer, push my mask button to apply that mask that I used to make the background to this layer. What I think I'll do, and actually you'll notice when I'm on the mask, it's either black or white. Everything on a mask is either black or white or a shade of gray. If it's feathered, again, I can alt click on this to look at the mask. And you can see that there are shades of gray to a mask. If I had greater feather, you see shades of gray spreading out more steps between the white and the black. This is a little peculiar over here. That's where that little flaw was before I fixed it. I could take a paintbrush in white. See if I'm feathered here. I'm feathered. And paint that out on the mask until it seems to blend in better. And actually, I see a flaw over here too in my masking. So I'll flip these back to black on this side and paint black right in there because that shoulder should have gone to the edge. On the layer to get back to the art. I'm going to just fill this layer with red, and I can do that with either edit, fill, or you see that shift function key 5, and that's why I say function keys 5 and 6, F5 and F6. The function keys are the row of numbered keys above the numbers on your keyboard. Here's a Mac keyboard, and you can see the function keys across the top. Here's a PC keyboard, and the function keys are across the top. So 5 and 6 right here are the two that you will find most handy for these Photoshop exercises. I'm going to fill that with red, image, fill, or shift F5. And there's a default setting here, 50% gray. We'll talk about that on one of these exercises. That's very important, and there's a reason they gave you a 50% gray. Color. This color red, or I could select the foreground color, which is red, or I could select the background color, which is white. I'll say foreground color. Screwed up my foreground color. I'll select the color red. Maybe I want this red. And I'll say, okay, 100% opacity. That'd be fine. There you go. So there it is. And you can see I've got that slight feather so that it's not going to look cut out. Now this doesn't look like a natural background, does it? So what I would do is change the blending mode. These are blending modes. We've got different kinds of layers. We're going to show all of the layers that we're using. If we had a really complicated project, you might want to show only, say, smart objects or only attributes or other things. But for these exercises, you can just leave it as all of them. You know, like this would be filters, text layers, whatever. No, we want all of them. Okay, so this layer, I'm going to change the blending mode. The blending mode refers to how this layer interacts with everything below it. And I'm going to change it from normal to dissolve, which kind of makes choppy little holes in it. Darken will darken the images below by that red. If I hold the shift key to turn off that mask, you can see it's turning everything red. Okay, do I want to darken it? Do I want to multiply it? On the PC, this may or may not work on Macs. I can't remember if it works on Macs, but I can, once I've selected one of these, use the arrows on the keyboard to cycle through all of these until I see an effect that I like. And I'll just go through all of them first. And then I'm going to go back up to, I think, try soft light. Now, maybe I don't want it that red. Then I can reduce the opacity of the fill. Or if I reduce the fill itself, that actually changes how it reacts with darker colors. Okay, so let's say I want that. Let's say I don't want that. Then I could pick a different color. Yeah, green. Take a fairly bright green here. Shift function key 5. Fill it with the foreground color. And I think I'd like that more subdued. So maybe I'll make that a multiply. I'd like you to try different opacities, different blending modes. And you can do this on one color change and only for the background. For the other color changes, I want you to use adjustment layers. Adjustment layers are down here at the bottom of the layer palette. So before I do that, let me select something else. I'd like to select just his coat. So again, I'm going to Command or Control click on the thumbnail. Command Shift I to invert that selection. So now I have Fred in his clothing. I'm going to take let's try the quick select tool and minus quick select, make this a little bigger, and subtract his head from the selection. That worked pretty well. Now down in here, it might get a little trickier. I'm going to reduce my selection size down to 9 points. Yeah, that was a little too much because there's too much similarity down here. So down here, I think what I'd better do is, let me just use the lasso to add this back into the clothing section. And then you can try the magnetic lasso. I'm not sure it will work that well in this darker shaded area, but I'll give it a try. I'm going to hold the Option key to subtract from the existing selection. And I'm almost just guessing where the edge of the vest is. It's around there. And I actually held the Alt key and the mouse the whole time because I didn't want it to go guessing where I wanted it to go. I'm going to go up there and double click that just to end that, and hold the Option key again and continue down this side. Now this time I'm not holding the mouse button, I'm letting it just follow it. And up there, and that's selected. So there's this coat, and I have to decide, do I want it if a brown coat, a brown suit, a blue suit, a black suit, a gray suit? A green suit? Well, I've got a green background, so probably not a green suit. This little thing that looks like a half moon, these are adjustment layers, and I'm going to find a solid color adjustment layer and select a suit color. And I think it's going to be a brown suit. No, a blue suit. I'm going with a blue suit. Nice navy blue suit here. And I'll say OK. Now you'll notice that my retouching is showing there because it's below the layer that has the retouching on it. So I'm going to just grab this layer and drag it up here so that it's above that. It also looks a little choppy here. So I may have to take my paintbrush on my mask, and you'll notice this automatically goes to black and white because it's either going to be black or white or gray on a mask. I'm going to select the white, take my brush, and just paint back in here to get that shoulder looking a little straighter. I'll change the blending mode to, let's try, I'll say color. And again, that was supposed to be above the retouch layer. Well, that looks very bright. We need to subdue that a little. And I might need a more intense blue. Let's try multiply and then bring the opacity back up. Fill. Bring the fill up and a little less opacity. Okay, that might do. Now some of that has kind of a hard edge because I forgot to feather that. So what I could do is select my filter here and I could blur it, or I can Command Option R. Command Option R goes into selection and allows me to adjust the selection. So I can change the feather right here. It's at a half pixel feather. I'll go to a 1 pixel feather. I can increase the contrast of it. I can shift the edge either in or out. And if you look up here, I don't want to shift it in for sure, but I might want to make sure I go out a little bit and let it just slightly overlap that green and say OK. Be feathered more. Again, Command Option R. 2 pixel feather. Still looks fuzzy. Well, filter, blur, Gaussian blur of say 1.5 pixels. Let's try 1 pixel. A Gaussian blur of 1 pixel should be enough. 1.3 pixels. The settings in Photoshop for filters such as this, most of them can only be in whole pixels, but some of them, like Gaussian blur, can be in decimals of pixels. And I'll go with that. I just need to take white on my mask and paint a little more white into there. So I'm actually painting on the mask. In white to change that edge. And it looks like I'll also use some over here. Okay, that's 2 parts. I got a background and I've got a coat. If I wanted his buttons to be more gray, on the mask, I could flip these, paint with black. So I'm masking more, and my flow is fairly low. My opacity, my flow is 74% flow, and like about a 20% opacity. And if I wanted to, I could take a little bit of color out of the buttons, so it's a slightly different blue than the suit, as you often see. I'm going to alt click on the mask so you can see I've just added a little bit of gray into there that changes the color in that area. I could give his face some color. I command or control click on the mask, I can get that reselected. If I command and shift click on the other mask, I can add that area in. And then if I just want his face, I can make sure I have the plus selection tool and add to this selection and just paint right around this collar there, paint this out of the selection, and get his hair. Plus on the side, maybe. No, that's good. A little bit of plus, which is shift to add to a selection, alt to subtract from a selection, alt or option. Okay, I think that's what I want for his face. Shift and add a little bit right in there. Okay. And I want to feather this, shift function key 6. I think I'm going to go a radius of 3 pixels. I want to make sure that, well, no, 2 pixels. I'd like to make sure that it doesn't have a harsh edge where his hair is. And his face needs to be some sort of warm color. So I have everything selected except his face. What I need to do is Command Shift I, invert that selection so I have only his face selected. And then another adjustment layer, solid color, maybe a red, usually something in the orange range. And just, you know, depending on skin color, it's going to be something in the orange range, probably. Might be a deeper orange, you know, a shade of orange, which would be a brown. It could be something a little rosier. I think Fred's Irish, so I'm going to give him a little rosier complexion. About there. I'll say okay. That looks a little strange, but if I change the blending mode to, say, color or multiply, probably not multiply, overlay. Probably overlay. Maybe screen. No, overlay. Overlay looks pretty good. Overlay keeps light things light and dark things dark. There's a cutoff at 50%. At 50%, say 50% gray, an overlay has no effect on the image. But anything above 50% density, it makes it lighter. Anything below 50% density, it makes it darker. I'm going to reduce the fill on this a little bit to see if I can get his face to look sort of natural. Okay, now what if I don't like my blue suit or my green background? The green background I would have to refill with a different color, but the blue suit, because it's an adjustment layer, I can double click on this swatch here and go find another color suit. You want a brown suit? There you go, there's a brown suit. I think I'll give him a brown suit this time. Hair. Does he have brown hair? Because that would be really handy if he had brown hair. Because if he has brown hair, I can Command click on this, Command Shift click on that, Command Shift click on that, and I'm left with just his hair and his shirt. I can take a rectangular selection tool, hold the Shift key to add this area down here to the selection, and I'm left with just his hair, except that I've got it inverted. So Command Shift I, and then I could add in this area to his hair. If I want just a light brown, maybe you should have a light brown hair. Flip those so white is selected. And on that mask, with a fairly large brush, because I can do this quickly and not much density, I'll just start painting in here. You can see his hair is becoming browner. Is it brown enough? I don't know. Maybe I should try color. Okay, so there's his hair. He's got brown hair this time, and I'm doing this only with 3 color layers. Does he have brown eyes? Well, one thing I'm sure of is his eyes are probably not the same color as face. I'm going to Command D, deselect, and on this face layer, take my paintbrush. I'm going to have to use a small paintbrush here. And in black, or in this case 19%, that's gray, just a little more density, 47%. And I can paint some gray in there so that his eyes aren't the same color as his skin. If I want to add color to his irises, perhaps they'd be brown. I could go to my brown layer and paint with white so it shows through. And give him brown eyes, but maybe I don't want brown eyes. And Alt click on this, you'll see I'm just painting holes in the mask. Undo those. What about blue eyes? Well, I'd need blue again for that. So let's say I take the, doesn't matter what layer I pick. I'm going to just add a new adjustment layer that's blue. I think him green eyes. Green eyes would save me a layer. Let's say blue. Okay. I'm going to make this a mask. This mask I'm going to fill with black, and I can do that with Shift function key 5. I'm not sure I can do that. Yes, I can. Okay. Another thing I can do for fills is Shift backspace will fill with, say, the background color, which is white. Alt backspace will fill with the foreground color. And so I've completely masked everything. And if I want to show just his eye color, you just do a white brush and, oh, that's heavy. I'm gonna make this let's try soft light. And put a little blue in his eyes there. I can't see that because it looks like I haven't blocked out enough color on this one. So there's his eyes. And I've got some blue in there. And maybe a little more blue in here. There he is with blue eyes. You can be more detailed and more precise if you like. I'm really just going to get this done quickly. Here on his hair, this little bit here, painting with white on the mask, and on the face mask, painting with black to remove that face color from his hair. That looks a little better. I could make his shirt some sort of off-white color. I could coordinate it to coat, Shift function key 6, feather that 2 pixels, take my airbrush and paint a little color in there, so that it's not a pure white. Alt backspace, fill that with black on that layer. Maybe shirt should be blue to match his eyes. So on this one, I could, with white paint, paint some blue into here. And likewise, you can add color to his tie by painting in white or black on any of these layers. You want green in his tie, you go to the green layer, take the brush, and, ooh, that's a big brush. Take the brush and You could just tint the whole thing green, or you could go in there and actually, say on the blue layer, I'll use a much smaller brush here. Again, using white, paint some of those little stripes in there on his tie. Okay, so that's Fred, and I do Fred a little different every semester, and you can do Fred any way you want to do Fred. A lot of people, if we're doing this in October, like to give Fred a Halloween appearance. That doesn't take any skill or talent. What I want you to do is develop your actual skills at controlling masking and controlling color. So I'd like to see a sort of natural looking Fred, not a Halloween Fred. And that's Fred. So Command S, save as, your last name, DL5A, as a PSD file, a Photoshop document. This saves with layers. I must see the layers when I'm grading. I must be able to look at your layers and your masks and see what adjustment layers you used and whether or not you did non-destructive retouching. Save. So that's it for Fred.